Welcome to Dusky Lore. Close your eyes, dim the lights, and listen closely as the shadows begin to speak. Story 1. When my wife, Caffeine, died, my world completely fell apart. Suddenly, I found myself alone, carrying the enormous responsibility of taking care of our little 3-year-old daughter, Alina. She was my little princess, the only light left in my life. But grief does not stop time, and life, cruel as it may be, goes on. On top of that, I had a business to keep running, and I knew I would not be able to do everything on my own. That is why I made the difficult decision to hire a nanny to take care of Alina during the day. I was very meticulous throughout the process. Interviews, background checks, references. I reviewed every detail with extreme care. That was how I met James. He was a polite young man, well-mannered and experienced in working with children. From the very beginning, Alina seemed to grow fond of him, which reassured me a little. I honestly believed I had made the right choice. One night, about 2 months after James started working with us, I had to stay late at the office. It was not anything out of the ordinary. Sometimes deadlines piled up and workdays stretched longer than I wanted. By the time I finally drove back home, it was almost midnight. However, when I arrived, something immediately felt wrong. James's car was not in the driveway. At first, I thought maybe he had taken Alina out for some late-night drive, but I quickly dismissed that idea. Why would he be out that late with such a small child? A feeling of unease began to take hold of me. As I got out of the car, I noticed that the house was completely dark. No lights on, no sounds. I opened the door quickly, my heart pounding, and started calling out, "James, Alina." There was no answer. I ran from room to room, went upstairs, down to the basement, checked the backyard. Nothing. The place was empty. Alina's toys were scattered across the living room, as if she had been playing only moments earlier. But there was no sign of her. I tried calling James, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Panic seized my chest. Where were they? With trembling hands, I dialed the emergency number. It took me 3 tries before I could dial it correctly. When they finally answered, I could barely get the words out. My daughter. She's gone. The nanny. He's gone too. The person on the other end of the line assured me that help would be sent immediately. Within minutes, officers arrived. They bombarded me with questions. What time did I leave work? When was the last time I saw James? Had I noticed anything strange about his behavior? I answered everything I could, although my mind was a storm of fear and confusion. One of the officers promised me, "We will find your daughter. We're issuing an Amber Alert." Those words gave me the slightest thread of hope, but the night felt endless. With every passing hour, the anguish grew. Where was my little girl? 3 agonizing days passed before the police called me. They had found James. For a brief moment, I felt a rush of relief. Finally, I would have answers. But that hope vanished the moment I heard the next words. "We have no news about your daughter." My heart sank. I went to the station immediately. There he was, in custody, wearing an expression completely different from that of the kind young man I had hired. His eyes avoided mine, and his body looked restless, nervous. "Where is she?" I shouted at him. "What did you do to my daughter?" One of the officers stepped between us before I could get any closer. "He claims he sold her," the officer said gravely. I felt as if the world had stopped. Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I just stared at him in disbelief, rage and horror mixing inside me. "You sold her. She's a child. What kind of monster are you?" I shouted in desperation. James muttered something inaudible, but the ringing in my ears kept me from hearing anything else. The officer then explained that James had confessed to selling Alina for $10,000 to someone living in an isolated cabin in the forests of Alaska. "Who is that person?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How can we get her back?" The police assured me they were already working on it. following a solid lead on the location and coordinating with local authorities in Alaska. But everything was moving with unbearable slowness. Every passing minute felt like an eternity. The weight of fear crushed me. I could not sleep, eat, or think about anything else. I could only picture Alina, scared, maybe crying for me. The thought of my little girl in the hands of a stranger was tearing me apart inside. 2 more days passed before there was finally news. They had located the cabin, hidden among the trees nearly an hour from the nearest town. It belonged to an elderly woman who lived alone. When the officers entered, they found signs confirming their suspicions. Children's clothes, toys, and a small teddy bear, identical to the one that belonged to Alina. My heart pounded as I listened to the report, and then they said it. In the basement, there was a locked room with no windows. My daughter was there. I traveled to Alaska as soon as I could. When I finally saw her, my heart broke and rebuilt itself at the same time. Alina was scared, confused, but alive. I held her as tightly as I could, promising her that I would never let her go again. I could not stop crying. It was as if all the pain that had built up over those days came pouring out at once. The police had arrested the woman who was keeping her in the cabin. She was an elderly woman with a fragile appearance, but with a disturbing look in her eyes. She claimed that she had bought Alina because she wanted to raise her as if she were her own daughter, as though that could justify what she had done. When they searched the place, the officers found disturbing things: antique dolls, locks of hair kept in jars, and photographs of children taped to the walls. Even now, thinking about what might have happened if they had not found her in time makes my blood run cold. Alina does not talk much about what happened in that cabin, and I do not pressure her. She is trying to adjust little by little, although the spark that used to shine in her eyes no longer glows with the same intensity. I enrolled her in therapy, hoping that with time she will regain the joy that was taken from her. As for me, I am still struggling with guilt. I was the one who hired James, the one who let him into our lives. If I had been more careful, if I had not worked so late that night, maybe none of this would have happened. But I cannot change the past. The only thing left for me is to take care of my daughter and make sure she always knows that she is safe. I sold the house soon afterward. The empty walls, the silent toys, the memories of that night. They were too painful to bear. Alina and I moved to another city, far away from everything. Now every night I check her room 2, sometimes 3 times, just to make sure she is still there, sleeping peacefully. James is in prison. The woman is too. And although I know they are both where they belong, that does not erase the fear that stays with me. That fear of losing her again is a shadow that never completely fades. Story 2. Thanksgiving used to feel like true home. The smell of freshly roasted turkey, Sam's silly jokes, and the warmth of family filling the table. It was a holiday I always looked forward to with excitement. But after 2019, that celebration became quieter, emptier. That was the year Sam died in a car accident. He was only 14 years old. The image of his body in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines making slower and slower beeping sounds, still haunts me even now. By 2021, my parents and I were simply trying to get through the holidays. We tried to pretend things were normal, even though we knew nothing would ever be the same again. That year, we invited my Uncle Joe and Aunt Linda, hoping to fill at least a little of the emptiness Sam had left behind. The house, tucked away near the woods, had a cozy but lonely feeling, a place where silence seemed to stretch for miles. The afternoon went by as usual. Too much food, a little more beer than necessary, and trivial conversations that awkwardly and insistently avoided the subject we all wanted to avoid: Sam. It was as if no one dared to say his name, and that denial hurt more than the memories themselves. When everyone went to bed, the house was wrapped in that kind of deep stillness that only exists in the countryside. That was when the knocking began. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep had been avoiding me for a long time, especially on nights like that. My room was right at the end of the hallway, near what had once been Sam's room. Sometimes, without meaning to, my eyes would drift toward his closed door, as if I still expected to hear his voice on the other side. The first knock was soft, almost imperceptible. 3 gentle taps. I thought I had imagined it. But then came another set of 3, louder, clearer. It was not the wind or an animal. Someone was knocking on the front door. My phone was resting on the nightstand, but I did not dare pick it up. Something about those knocks paralyzed me, as if moving would let whoever was outside know that I was there. I held my breath, listening carefully, waiting to hear some noise from my parents or my aunt and uncle. Nothing. The rest of the house remained in absolute silence. The knocking continued. Always 3. It was not frantic or desperate, just steady, regular, almost deliberate. I stayed perfectly still, my heart pounding so hard that I thought its sound might drown out the knocking. And suddenly it stopped. I waited a long time before I finally dared to exhale. Minutes passed, maybe hours, before sleep finally overcame me. When I woke up, daylight was filtering through the curtains. I went downstairs and found my parents and Uncle Joe standing by the front door. My Aunt Linda was sitting at the kitchen table, holding a cup of coffee in her hands, though she was not drinking it. "Did you hear the knocking last night?" My father was the one who broke the silence. I nodded slowly. "Yes, around 3. "Exactly at 3, he confirmed, his face serious. My mother was pale, her eyes uneasy, moving back and forth between us. "No one went to check?" she asked. "No," Uncle Joe replied firmly. "Whoever it was, if it was even someone, had already left. There's nothing outside now." But there was something. When I opened the door to step outside, I almost tripped over it. A white sneaker, damp with frost. I stared at it for a long time until something in my mind clicked. I recognized it. It was Sam's. His favorite sneaker, the same one he had been wearing the day of the accident. I remembered the mark on the side, caused by his failed attempts to learn how to skateboard, and the faded letters on the heel. How is this here?" I murmured, barely able to get the words out. My mother covered her mouth with one hand, stepping back and shaking her head, as if refusing to accept what she was seeing. My father crouched down, but he did not touch it. None of us did. "We need to check the cameras," he finally said in a low voice. My father fast-forwarded the security footage to exactly 3 a.m. And there he was, the image of the porch dimly lit by the bulb above the door. And Sam. He was walking toward the camera as if he had just come out of the woods. He looked exactly the same as he had the day he died. The same jeans, the same hoodie, the same sneakers. His face looked pale, almost washed out by the poor resolution of the video. But it was unmistakably him. We watched him slowly approach the door and raise his hand. That was when the knocking began. We could see his knuckles hitting the wood, perfectly synchronized with what we had all heard. A chill ran through my body. The air in the house, despite being warm, turned icy. For a while, Sam simply stood there, calmly knocking on the door. And then suddenly something changed. He sharply turned his head toward the woods. His face transformed into a mask of terror. Without warning, he ran. He ran back into the darkness, as if something invisible were chasing him. No one else could be seen in the recording, but the fear in his expression was real. As he fled, one of his sneakers came off and was left on the porch. He did not stop to pick it up. The camera kept recording hours of complete stillness after that. When the video ended, no one said a word. My father closed the laptop without making a sound. My mother stood up and locked herself in her room. Uncle Joe muttered something about going to get firewood, but it took him more than an hour to come back. The sneaker stayed on the porch all day. No one wanted to touch it. As night fell, my father finally picked it up, put it in a box, and carried it up to the attic. He did not say a single word while doing it. We never spoke about that night again. Not directly, at least. Sometimes, though, I catch my parents staring at the attic door, uneasiness in their eyes, as if they are afraid the box might open on its own. And every Thanksgiving, without fail, I find myself awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, listening. I have never heard the knocking again. Before moving on to the next story, if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell so you can watch the upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. Story 3. My name is George, and I work as a police officer at the Shenandoah County Emergency Communications Center in Strasburg, Virginia. Becoming a police officer was never my first choice in life. When I finished college, I dreamed of becoming an actor. I auditioned for television shows and movies, hoping to land a role that would launch my career. But luck was never on my side. Eventually, the need to pay the bills forced me to look for stability, and that is how I ended up in the world of law enforcement. It is not a glamorous job, but it is steady. Most days go by without major incidents. Writing tickets, responding to minor disputes, or once in a while making an arrest. Most incidents end without serious problems. But one night in December, everything changed. I went through something that marked me deeply, an experience I will never be able to erase from my memory. It was late, close to midnight, when we received a 911 call. A woman was acting erratically and causing damage at the Ramada by Wyndham Hotel. I was assigned to the case. Those kinds of calls are not unusual, especially during the holidays, when emotions often run high. Even so, I never could have imagined what was waiting for me that night. When I arrived at the hotel, the parking lot was disturbingly quiet. There was only one solitary figure, a woman. She was barefoot, and she was holding something in her hands, something that clearly did not belong to her, although I could not make out what it was. Her movements were abrupt and uncoordinated, and everything about her conveyed distress and confusion. I approached cautiously, speaking to her calmly. I assured her that she was safe and asked her to come closer. She looked at me with wide eyes and suddenly asked, "Are you going to take me to jail?" Before I could respond, she lunged at me. Instinctively, I stepped back, trying to grab her, but she slipped away from me. Then suddenly, she turned around and ran. I yelled at her to stop, but she ignored me. I pulled out my taser and started chasing her. I lost sight of her for a moment when she disappeared behind a dumpster. My heart was pounding as I scanned the area, and then I saw her come out again, running through the shadows. I tried to catch up to her, but I was already out of breath. I am not going to lie. I am not in the best physical shape, and I was feeling it. When I made my way back toward my patrol car, I got a surprise. The woman was there too. Only this time she was not running away. She was coming straight toward me. Her hands were waving in the air as she approached. I shouted firmly, "Back up. I don't want to hurt you." But she did not stop. I pulled out the taser again and fired it. Nothing happened. I tried a second time and it still did not work. Fear and frustration started mixing together. Suddenly she lunged at me and snatched my radio transmitter. In the struggle, we both fell to the ground. She got up quickly. Her pants slipped down a little, exposing her underwear. A strange and surreal image in the middle of that chaos. But I did not have time to think about it. With the radio still in her hands, she wrapped the cord around my neck. I started choking. Panic flooded me. Blindly, I reached for my baton and managed to hit one of her legs, trying to free myself. But she was strong, relentless. She took the baton away from me and hit me in the head with it. I felt a sharp pain shoot through my skull. My mind went hazy. We separated for a few seconds, and in that instant, without thinking too much, I pulled out my firearm. My hands were shaking. "Stop," I shouted at her, my voice breaking. "I don't want to shoot you." She did not listen. She kept moving toward me. her face twisted by rage and desperation. I backed away, not knowing what to do, and then in a split second I pulled the trigger. 4 shots rang out into the night. Her body jerked with each impact and then fell to the ground. She stayed motionless for a few seconds, until she started to move slightly and then became completely still. I kept shouting at her not to move even though she was no longer responding. My chest was rising and falling violently. The air felt heavy, unreal. I grabbed the radio. Miraculously, it was still working, and called for backup with a trembling voice. When the other officers arrived, I was still standing there trying to hold back tears. I could not stop repeating in my mind, why did she make me do this? I have never been a violent person. I became a police officer to help people, not to take lives. But that night it was her life or mine. One of my fellow officers, David, knelt beside the woman and began performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. For more than 6 minutes, he tried to bring back her pulse without success, until the paramedics arrived. She was taken to the hospital, but hours later we were informed that she did not survive. Her name was Melissa Tompkins. She was 40 years old. She was homeless, and she suffered from severe mental health problems. That night she was also under the influence of methamphetamine. The days that followed were a whirlwind of interviews, reports, and investigations. In the end, I was cleared of all wrongdoing. The authorities concluded that my actions were justified, but that did not ease the weight in my chest, or the nightmares that have haunted me ever since. I still work as a police officer. Since that night, nothing that chaotic has happened again during my shifts. I do my duty day after day, but the memory of that moment is still alive inside me, like a constant reminder of how unpredictable this job can be, and of the enormous emotional cost that comes with making a life or death decision. Story 4. Vacations are supposed to be relaxing, right? That was exactly what my wife Melody and I thought when we decided to spend a week in Italy. We had been saving for months, dreaming about the cobblestone streets, the warm Mediterranean breeze, and plates of pasta so big they could barely fit on the table. And the trip was everything we imagined. But when we came back home, something felt different. A strange feeling, almost imperceptible at first. It all started with small details, things that seemed harmless. The books on the shelf were no longer in the same order we had left them. A mug we had bought in Rome appeared on the dining room table, even though I clearly remembered it being on the kitchen counter. I made a joke. Maybe the house missed us and decided to entertain itself while we were gone. Melody smiled, but I could tell from her expression that she did not find it funny. We tried to brush it off, telling ourselves it was just our imagination. Maybe we had moved things and forgotten, or maybe the books had shifted on their own. Even so, that discomfort lingered, hanging in the air like a bad feeling, or like an unpleasant smell that is impossible to ignore. A few days later, I was working my night shift. My office was only 20 minutes from the house, and the night was quiet. Close to midnight, my phone vibrated. I looked at the screen. It was Melody. "Everything okay?" I asked. But what I heard was not her calm voice, only her fast, shaky breathing, as if she were trying to hold back panic. "Melody, are you there?" "I think someone is in the house," she whispered. Her voice was breaking, and I felt a chill run through my body. "What?" "Melody, stay on the line with me." But before I could say anything else, the call was cut off. I did not think twice. I grabbed my keys, ran out of the building, and drove like a madman. The streetlights passed by in blurred flashes. I had only one thought in my head: Melody. When I got home, everything was dark. The porch light, which we were sure we had left on, was now off. My hands were shaking as I tried to get the key into the lock. The house was completely silent. "Melody," I shouted, and my voice echoed through the empty walls. I turned on the lights one by one as I moved through the rooms. The living room empty. the kitchen the same, the dining room in order. And then I saw her. Melody was lying on the hallway floor unconscious with a thin stream of blood running down her forehead. My stomach twisted. Melody. I dropped to my knees beside her, gently shaking her. Her eyelids fluttered, she let out a groan, and when she opened her eyes, relief flooded through me. "What happened?" I asked, trying to sound calm. Melody, still dazed, sat up with my help and put her hand to her head. When she pulled it away, her fingers were stained red. "I went to the kitchen," she said weakly. "I heard footsteps behind me. I thought it was you, but before I could turn around, someone hit me." My heart turned cold. "Did you see him? Do you know who it was?" She slowly shook her head. "No, I did not even have time to look." After making sure she was okay, I called the police. They arrived quickly. 2 officers searched the house while another took our statements. "There are no signs of forced entry," one of them said. "Are you sure someone was here?" A wave of anger rushed through me. Of course someone had been there. My wife had been attacked in her own home. But I held myself back. "He must have had a key," I said. "Or he knew how to get in without leaving a trace." The officer nodded, taking notes in his notebook. "We will do a full check, but it would be best if you spend the night somewhere else." So we stayed at a nearby hotel. We did not sleep at all. The police did not find anyone. Whoever had entered disappeared without leaving a trace. They recommended changing the locks and installing a security system, but their words did little to reassure us. During the following weeks, we tried to get back to our routine, although the feeling that something was still wrong never went away. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind against the windows made us shiver. Melody stopped staying alone in the house when I worked nights. She started sleeping at her sister's house. I did not blame her. One afternoon, while I was cleaning the guest room, I noticed that the closet door was slightly open. When I opened it, I saw something in the back, hidden behind a stack of boxes. A baseball bat. But it was not ours. My heart skipped a beat. My hands were shaking as I stared at it. Was it the weapon the intruder had used? Or something worse? What if that person had been living in our house without us knowing? I called the police again. They came right away and took the bat to analyze it. I never found out whether they discovered fingerprints or any clue. Several months have passed since then. We have taken every precaution possible. New locks, cameras, alarms, motion lights. But no matter what we do, that feeling of being watched never completely goes away. Story 5. I will never forget the time I almost lost my life. It happened in September 2022 in Onalaska, Wisconsin. At the time, I was a sophomore in high school, and I was working a summer job where I met Austin, a 17-year-old boy. He had gone to the same high school as me, although he had been expelled for plagiarism. Throughout the summer, he picked me up and drove me home after work, since I did not have my driver's license yet. It was obvious that he had feelings for me. He hugged me every day, and even though I knew perfectly well that he liked me, I pretended not to notice. And it worked. I did not feel the same way about him. It had already been 2 or 3 weeks since school had started again, and I was still having a hard time adjusting. I had that kind of summer nostalgia that makes the days feel slow and empty. One night, Austin and I were coming back from a party hosted by a classmate. When we arrived at my house, he parked in front of the driveway. Before I could get out of the car, he looked at me with some uncertainty and asked if I wanted to go out with him. I let out a small laugh and told him that I would rather we just be friends. His face darkened. He muttered an okay with a sad grimace. We said goodbye with a wave, and I went inside. I took off my shoes, put on my pajamas, brushed my teeth, and got ready for bed. Just before lying down, I got a message on my phone. I unlocked it without thinking, and what I saw on the screen made my blood run cold. It was a long message from a friend. In it, she told me that Austin had been taking pictures of me while I was sleeping through my bedroom window. Sometimes I left the curtains open because no streetlight or moonlight came in from that side, so I never thought anyone could see me. But there they were, pictures of me sleeping, sent as proof. My friend had found out because Austin himself had told her, bragging about it through text messages. He even had a photo album on his phone titled, "The Love of My Life." It felt like a needle had pierced my heart. In that instant, I knew his crush had crossed a terrifying line. I texted him immediately in all caps, demanding that he never contact me again. He replied by apologizing and pretending to be the victim. His message made me boil with rage. I told him to delete my number forever, and then I blocked him. I was no longer sleepy. I felt nervous, vulnerable, with my heart racing. I took melatonin and Benadryl to force myself to sleep, and eventually I managed to fall asleep. I do not know what time it was when the sound of breaking glass woke me up. Panic paralyzed me. Right in front of me, among the shards of the broken window, was Austin. I did not even have time to process what he had in his hand. I felt the blow before I saw it. He stabbed me in the face with a knife. I screamed. I cried. The pain and terror made me lose control. A few seconds later, I heard my father's voice shouting from the hallway, "What the hell is going on?" That was when Austin fled, jumping back out through the broken window. My father burst into the room. His face showed pure horror, fear, rage, desperation. He hugged me tightly while asking if I was okay, what had happened. Through sobs, I told him that Austin had come in through the window and attacked me with a knife. His expression changed to pure fury. Without thinking, he ran out of the house to try to catch him, but he could not find him. I called 911, barely able to hold the phone. I told them everything. They said they would send a patrol car and an ambulance immediately. They arrived about 10 minutes later. By then, I was already dizzy, with my face covered in blood. My father gave me water and wrapped me in a towel while we waited for the paramedics. I was able to tell my version of what happened before they loaded me into the ambulance and took me to the hospital. They treated me for the stab wounds, and I spent the night admitted to the hospital. The next day, I was able to go back home. The police continued their investigation, and after some time, they finally caught him. Later, I learned that while he was being treated at the hospital, Austin confessed that he knew he was going to prison for a long time. He said he did not understand why he had done it, but that he loved me. He was charged with first-degree attempted intentional homicide and aggravated burglary with a $50,000 cash bond. A year later, he was found guilty on the first charge, while the second charge was dismissed but still included in his record. In the end, Austin was sentenced to 16 years in Wisconsin State Prison, followed by 4 years of supervised release. Justice was served, yes, but the trauma remains. Even now, I still have a hard time trusting men. Every time I meet someone new, I am overwhelmed by the fear that they may have ulterior motives. I know it sounds paranoid, but I still suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. I do not feel hatred toward Austin, only pity. And although it hurts me to say it, I hope that when he dies, he burns in hell for what he did to me. Story 6. When my father remarried, I decided to come home for Thanksgiving to meet my new stepmother and her 2 children. I had not spent much time with them before, but I wanted to give them a chance. The trip only took an hour and a half, so I arrived around mid-morning. The house looked the same as always, although my father had told me he had offered to sell it to buy something bigger, so the new family would have more space. However, his wife insisted on keeping that house. Later, I would understand why. She did not want to share the space with us. She had no interest in my sister or me coming back home. When I walked in, the welcome was cold. Her smile was fake, the kind that never reaches the eyes. "Can I help with anything?" I asked, trying to sound friendly. "I don't need help," she replied sharply. I spent the morning watching TV awkwardly and trying to make conversation with her children. The younger one, only 13, seemed nice enough, but the older one, who was 18, gave me a bad feeling. He had a piercing stare, a mocking smile that appeared at strange moments, as if he knew something I did not. At noon, my stepmother called for her older son to carve the turkey, but my father stepped in and said he would do it. He started slicing it, but suddenly frowned. "It's not cooked through," he muttered. Her face darkened. "This oven must be broken," she said irritably. My father shrugged and put the turkey back in. The atmosphere grew thick, heavy with tension. When we finally ate, the food was strange. The turkey was half raw, the side dishes were poorly made, and the rest of the meal was barely edible. She sat at the head of the table, watching us eat with an expression I could not interpret. When I asked about dessert, she let out a dry laugh. "We don't need it," she answered coldly. As I was leaving, she said something to me that stayed in my mind. "Next time, call before you come." Months passed, and my father began to grow distant. Every time we spoke, his calls were short, his voice weak and uncertain. My sister told me she was worried about his health, so I decided to visit him again. The moment I crossed the doorway, I felt the house had become darker, more oppressive. The atmosphere was heavy. My stepmother opened the door with an even more forced smile than before. "Your father is not feeling well," she said, blocking the doorway. "I want to see him," I replied firmly. After hesitating for a moment, she stepped aside. I found my father sitting in the living room armchair, hunched over, his skin pale, his face gaunt. "Dad, what's wrong?" I asked, sitting down beside him. "I'm just tired," he murmured. "Have you been to the doctor?" "He doesn't need that," my stepmother interrupted sharply from the doorway. "I'm taking care of him." The sound of her voice sent chills down my spine. Something was not right. I decided to make tea for everyone and went to the kitchen. While I was looking for the tea bags, I noticed something on the counter. A dark glass bottle with a handwritten label. It read, "Restorative syrup." Curious, I picked it up. The liquid inside was thick with a bitter, almost chemical smell. "What is this?" I asked out loud. When I turned around, I saw her standing in the doorway. Her expression changed instantly. The smile vanished and her eyes hardened. "It's for your father," she said quickly, stepping closer to snatch it from me. "It helps him recover." Her tone was calm, but her hands were trembling. I felt a stab of distrust. "What's in it?" I insisted. "Vitamins," she answered curtly. "It's none of your business." But it did not look natural. That night I could not sleep. The image of that bottle kept circling in my head. The next morning, before everyone woke up, I quietly went down to the kitchen. The bottle was gone. My heart skipped a beat. I searched everywhere until I found it hidden behind some cereal boxes. I opened it. I tasted a tiny amount with a spoon. The flavor was bitter, with a slight burn that left a metallic aftertaste in my mouth. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I took a picture of the label with my phone and put the bottle back where I had found it. Later, I spoke with my father. "Dad, what is that syrup she's giving you?" He frowned, confused. "She says it's for my health," he replied weakly. "And do you feel better?" I asked. He took a moment to answer, then shook his head. "I feel worse." I did not have time to say more. My stepmother appeared in the doorway, her eyes full of suspicion. "What are you talking about?" she asked tensely. I stood up. "I think Dad needs to see a doctor." Her expression turned icy. "I am taking perfect care of him." "No, you are not," I said firmly. "Something is wrong, and I'm not leaving until he sees a professional." For a moment, I thought she was going to scream at me or attack me, but instead she smiled. A slow, icy smile. "Whatever you want," she said quietly, and walked away. That night, I stayed by my father's side without leaving him alone. The next morning, I took him to the hospital. The test results left me breathless. The so-called restorative syrup contained toxic substances capable of slowly poisoning him over time. When I confronted her with the evidence, her sweet mask fell apart. She screamed, insulted me, called me ungrateful, and accused me of ruining her life. But I did not care. My only concern was getting my father out of that house. With my sister's help, we managed to move him in with us. It was not easy. My stepmother fought tooth and nail to stop it, but in the end we did it. As the weeks passed, Dad began to recover, both physically and emotionally. He never talked much about what had happened, but I could see in his eyes the relief of being free from her. As for my stepmother, she disappeared from our lives after the divorce, and I hope we never hear from her again. Story 7. Traveling for work had always been part of my routine, but that trip from London to New York was different. It was not my first time in the city, but it was the first time I chose a cheap Airbnb instead of a hotel. Work had been slow and budgets were tight, so I booked a small room in a shared apartment for a week. At first glance, it seemed fine, clean in Queens and close to public transportation. The reviews were not amazing, but they were not alarming either. When I arrived, the building looked old but solid. It had that typical urban feel, cracked steps, graffiti on the walls, and a slight smell of dampness floating through the hallways. My room was tiny, a bed, a desk, and a closet, but cozy. There was a shared kitchen and bathroom at the end of the hallway. That first night, while I was unpacking, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, I found a man in his 40s, tall, thin, with slightly messy hair and a smile that was a little too wide. "Hi, I'm Tom," he said. "I live next door. If you need anything, just knock. I've been here for several years, so I know the area well." I thanked him and introduced myself. He seemed friendly, maybe too friendly, but I chalked it up to local custom. In London, it was not common for strangers to be that open. During the next few days, Tom became a constant presence. Every time I left or came back to my room, he was there, in the hallway, in the kitchen, or waiting to start a conversation. He gave me advice on where to eat, warned me about dangerous neighborhoods, and even suggested tourist spots I could visit in my free time. At first, I appreciated it. Traveling alone can be lonely, and having someone to talk to felt comforting. But soon his friendliness started to feel invasive. He asked too many questions. Where I worked, what exactly I was doing in New York, how long I would be staying, even how much I had paid for the Airbnb. I answered vaguely, not wanting to seem rude, even though I already felt that his curiosity was hiding something more. One night I came back late from a meeting and found him waiting outside my door. He was holding a steaming cup of coffee and offered it to me with a smile. "I thought you could use this," he said. I thanked him, although I could not help wondering how he knew the exact time I would be back. It was as if he had been watching me. That night I locked the door and checked the windows. The sounds of the city, sirens, horns, distant voices, seemed louder than usual. I could not sleep. My mind replayed every encounter with Tom, looking for signs I might have ignored. The next morning I noticed something strange. My laptop, which I always kept in my bag, was sitting on the desk. I could have sworn I had not left it there. I checked my things, my wallet, my passport. Everything seemed to be in place. Even so, the uneasiness remained. That day, Tom knocked on my door again. I looked through the peephole and saw him standing there smiling, waiting. I did not answer. After a few seconds, he turned around and left. That night, while I was working on my laptop, I noticed the Wi-Fi was running very slowly. I opened the network settings and saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a connected device called Tom's phone. My chest tightened. Why was he using my connection? The next day, I confronted him, trying to sound casual. "Were you having problems with your Wi-Fi?" I asked in the kitchen. He smiled with his usual calm expression. "I don't have my own Wi-Fi," he replied. "Sometimes I borrow the neighbor's signal." I laughed to hide my discomfort, but inside I felt trapped. That man was crossing boundaries, and I still had several more days to spend there. That night, things got worse. I came back from the restaurant and noticed my door was slightly open. My heart was pounding as I pushed it open. My bag was open and my belongings were scattered across the floor. The only thing missing was my watch, an inexpensive one, but with sentimental value. I ran to Tom's door and knocked, but no one answered. I debated whether to call the police or simply leave, but who would believe me? Over a missing watch? I spent the night without sleeping, my back pressed against the door and a kitchen knife in my hands. Every sound in the hallway made me shiver. The next morning I saw him in the hallway greeting me with his usual smile, as if nothing had happened. I wanted to scream at him, but all I managed was a forced smile before locking myself back inside. I decided to check the Airbnb reviews again. This time I looked more carefully. There was the pattern I had not noticed before. Several guests mentioned a nosy neighbor who made them feel uncomfortable. Some even reported missing items, although no one had ever done anything about it. I contacted the host, but he downplayed the whole thing. Frustrated and scared, I finally called the police. When the officers arrived, Tom pretended to be surprised. He denied everything with his calm smile. But when they searched his apartment, they found not only my watch, but also jewelry, devices, and passports belonging to other guests. His expression changed completely as they handcuffed him. His look, once friendly, turned cold and full of hatred. The officers assured me that I was safe now, but I could not stay there. I packed my things and booked a last-minute hotel. That night, lying in the bed of my new room, I could not stop thinking about Tom. He had pretended to be kind while watching me, gathering information little by little, waiting for the perfect moment to take advantage of me. The mere thought of what might have happened if I had not called the police kept me awake for hours. I learned an invaluable lesson on that trip. Always trust your instincts and never ignore warning signs. When I returned to London, I told my story to friends and family. Some were horrified. Others just told me to go back to staying in hotels. I laughed, but deep down I knew that experience had left a permanent mark on me. Story 8. When I was a child, I attended a church in my neighborhood. It was not a large church, nor was there anything special about the building itself. It was modest, with plain walls and pews worn down by the years. But there was something about that place that made me feel at peace. It was the soft music, the quiet prayers, and the sense of community that filled the atmosphere every Sunday. I liked going to church, listening to the pastor, and feeling part of something warm, safe, and familiar. At first, the pastor seemed like a kind and approachable man. He had a calm voice and a way of speaking that made everyone feel important. His sermons were full of passion and faith, and his conviction in the goodness of the church inspired me. I admired him deeply, until I began to feel a discomfort I could not explain. At first, it was something subtle. I noticed that the pastor was always watching me, that his eyes rested on me more often than normal. I was only a child, and although I did not fully understand why, there was something in his gaze that made me feel uneasy. I could not define it, but I knew something was wrong. One Sunday after the service, my parents stayed outside the church talking with some friends. I was waiting patiently, playing with my hands, when the pastor approached me. "Can we talk for a moment?" he said with a smile. He explained that it would just be a brief conversation, and although I felt a stab of nervousness, I agreed. He led me to a small room in the back of the church. It was a narrow, dark space with only a desk and 2 chairs. The atmosphere was very different from the rest of the church, heavy without the warmth or light that I loved so much in the main sanctuary. We sat down and he began asking me questions about school, whether I had friends, how my studies were going, and what I liked to do. I answered him innocently. At first, the conversation seemed normal. until the tone changed. The pastor moved a little closer. I did not understand why, but it made me feel trapped. The way he spoke became strangely intimate, and his gaze more intense. I felt the air grow thick, and a wave of discomfort ran through my body. My childish instincts were screaming that something was not right, but I did not have the words or the knowledge to express it. So I stayed silent. After a few minutes, the pastor stood up as if nothing had happened and told me I could go. I left without fully understanding what had happened, carrying only a confused and unpleasant feeling. My parents were waiting for me outside. They noticed the tension on my face and asked if everything was okay. I did not know what to say. I shrugged and nodded, although deep inside something told me that it should never happen again. In the following weeks, the discomfort grew. Every Sunday, whenever I saw him, I was filled with the same feeling of fear and nervousness. The pastor no longer spoke to me directly, but his presence felt threatening. I did not fully understand why, but I knew I wanted to stay away from him. Years passed. I stopped being a child and entered adolescence. And it was then, in a health class at school, that I learned about personal boundaries and sexual harassment. For the first time, I understood what had happened, that the situation had not been confusion or a misunderstanding, but inappropriate behavior. The memory came rushing back to me, along with a mixture of anger, fear, and sadness. I knew I had to speak. It took me time to gather the courage, but one night I sat down with my parents and told them everything. I told them about that conversation with the pastor, about how he had made me feel, and about the discomfort that had stayed with me for so long. Their reactions were immediate: shock, anger, sadness. My father asked me why I had not told them sooner. I explained that at the time I was only a child, that I did not understand what was happening, and that I did not have the words to explain it. They supported me completely, although it was clear they also felt guilty for not noticing. Even so, we decided to act. A few days later, we met with the person in charge of the church, who listened to my story. I was afraid he would not believe me, but to my surprise, he listened carefully and believed me. That validation was an enormous relief, as if a burden I had carried for years had finally been lifted from my shoulders. A week later, we received an email informing us that the pastor had been removed from his position and expelled from the church. He would no longer be allowed to work there. My parents and I felt a mixture of relief, sadness, and anger. We did not know what became of him afterward, but we hoped that measure would prevent him from harming anyone else. I never set foot in that church again. Just thinking about the place causes me pain and disgust. Sometimes I wonder if I was the only one, if other girls went through the same thing and were never able to speak about it. I do not know, but I sincerely hope that my voice helped stop him